Jufufu is the second ever limited fire stunner to be added to Zenless, and yes, she is as powerful as she is goofy and silly. Looks aside, Jufufu's gameplay value is incredible with her ability to do damage / daze off field while also giving a team-wide crit damage buff. That's why today we'll be breaking down everything you need to know about Jufufu. Full disclaimer though, today's footage will come from the creator beta server, so things are subject to change. But if today's video taught you anything or if you enjoyed it, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. But on that note, let's break down everything you need to know about Jufufu's teams on release. Jufufu's gameplay revolves around her two unique resources, Might and Momentum. Though this will be less relevant as we explain how she functions, Jufufu frequently uses her ultimate and EX special attacks to generate Might, which then provide the team with a crit damage buff. Now, if you're familiar with Pan Yinhu, you'll likely be familiar with the fact that Jufufu is much easier to play than her skill descriptions would suggest. This is because of another added feature to her kit, which is something similar to what Pan has, where Jufufu automatically performs her core passive mechanic when off field and upon reaching a certain might threshold. As a result, all of her mechanics are less relevant, and the main priorities for Jufufu players instead are to simply use defensive assist and use her EX special / ultimate whenever available or when buffs are expiring. On the topic of might, said unique mechanic builds up over time and provides a team-wide crit damage buff that scales specifically with her attack. But now let's actually talk about the specifics of her kit. The first thing we should talk about are Jufufu's two special resources. As mentioned earlier, one is labeled as Momentum and the other is labeled as Might. To keep things simple, Momentum is gained by using certain abilities, and upon hitting enemies, 1 point of Momentum is consumed, changing the damage that she deals to fire damage and then granting 25 points of Might. Might, on the other hand, is Jufufu's other special resource that will activate her chain attack at 100 stacks. In terms of generation, this is also generated similarly just by using your skills and ultimate as well, but this is the foundation upon which Jufufu actually shines. Now let's break down Jufufu's core passive. When Jufufu gets 100 might, she uses her chain attack and activates the Tiger's Roar state, which gives 20% crit damage. Additionally, when Jufufu's initial attack is greater than or equal to 2800, every 100 attack after this will increase the crit damage gained by 5%, up to a maximum additional increase of 30. Now, while in the Tiger's Roar state, Jufufu's own personal chain attack / ultimate damage will also increase by 20 to 40%, but in terms of duration, Tiger's Roar state lasts for 30 seconds and repeated triggers reset the duration. Now, while all of this is fantastic, one of the not yet mentioned best aspects of the state is the added 50 impact that Jufufu gains while she's in it. Because of this, Jufufu becomes a powerful stunning and DPS increasing threat, assuming you play her and invest in her. Now, as an added note, while both attack and impact are important for Jufufu, it's worth noting that impact 6 slot is typically more comfortable and preferred for casual play unless you're going out of your way to calculate whether the added impact will allow you to gain another stun window. As a result of this, however, Jufufu may end up with a build where she lacks the 3400 attack to maximize her core passive buff, but to be clear, this is fine as the lost value from not capping it is not nearly as significant as you may think. And to be more specific, Jufufu's teams will normally only lose about 1 to 2% worth of damage per 100 attack. This again means that it's not the end of the world if you don't cap and reach 3400 attack. When another character in your squad is an attack or rupture character, the maximum decibels for all characters in the squad increases by 1000. Now additionally, when an attack or rupture agent specifically uses an ultimate, they also gain 300 decibels. Now this of course is pretty nice for stacking future ultimates on said characters, but the actual value of this passive is pretty dependent on the fight and how wasteful / overcapped you can be with your decibels. Now in terms of her actual abilities, her basic is a pretty straightforward 4-strike combo, but it is worth mentioning that it can be continued endlessly in a forward scratching infinite combo. Jufufu's EX special swings her companion forward for a powerful dazing strike, but upon use she also gains 3 points of momentum and 80 points of might. At this point you might be wondering how Jufufu can reach the 100 might that she needs if her EX special only provides her with 80 and she is of course just shy of 100, but that's where her core passive comes into play, with Hu Wei, aka her companion, automatically attacking enemies from off field and providing might upon hitting them. Now Jufufu's assists don't necessarily have any special mechanics associated with them, but performing an assist follow-up with Jufufu will provide her with 1 point of momentum on a 10-second cooldown. This means that her defensive assist plus follow-up will be very helpful for activating her momentum mechanic, but otherwise this ability is pretty standard and unnoteworthy. Regarding Jufufu's chain attack, its base version is pretty normal, and as with most stun characters, their chain attacks are low value. However, with Jufufu, once reaching at least 100 points of might and after triggering a chain attack, she automatically performs a special ability, consuming 100 might to open Huwei and striking enemies in a small area. Now, in addition to this, if momentum is available following the special attack, and assuming Jufufu is not on field, Fiery Spin can then be activated after the skill ends, and this of course boosts both Jufufu's overall DPS and provides value to the team. Now finally, regarding Jufufu's ultimate, this deals a decent amount of damage and daze, but ultimately the most important part of this skill is the 6 points of momentum and 100 might that she gains after immediately using it. Overall, this is very nice for increasing uptime on Jufufu's crit damage buff and should be used whenever necessary. Now, as we get into the team section, let's quickly go over the format of this test. First, the goal here was to have all primary DPS's additional abilities active, as without them, many would lose significant damage. That said, I did test teams with supportive leaning DPS / anomaly agents as the third part of the team. To this end, and for the specific format, I will admit that some teams performed much better than others, but because this was mostly due to the team functioning as a XUAN plus other super strong DPS like Miyabi tag team, I didn't include many of the findings here and didn't explore much further, as other teams were way worse performing. Miyabi was one of the only exceptions, as her damage, even without her additional ability, was still quite impressive. But for other agents paired that weren't just DPS, I did also consider not using their additional abilities, and because the results were quite interesting, for other agents that I paired together, I didn't prioritize activating their additional abilities nearly as much, so supports, defense agents, or sometimes even stunners were used without their added value, as oftentimes the buffs that they provided were locked to their EX specials or their core passives. Next though, let's talk about the standards and setups that I ended up using. The following teams had M6 on A ranks, M0 on S ranks, and of course the signature W engines / reasonable options / alternatives of every character. But as always, additional changes were necessary in some cases if results skewed things to be super unrealistic, but again, these findings will always need more context and a bit more consideration, because things like the encounter, the boss, their buffs, and other factors will and did affect these results. With this out of the way, however, let's start with XUAN based Jufufu teams. Now, XUAN when paired with Jufufu was amazing, plain and simple. These two characters, both in terms of lore and gameplay, were meant to be played together, and their insane performances when used on the same team is proof of it. Now, when it comes to the best performing partner with XUAN and Jufufu, you guessed it, ASTRA Yao is unsurprisingly the best. And I get it, you're probably tired of hearing about ASTRA being the best in every team, but for the sake of honesty, it's true. She consistently proves to be the strongest support option if you use them together. That said, if we excluded her, Pulchra and interestingly Pan Yinhu stood out as the next best partners. And even more interestingly, Pan's performance was quite competitive with ASTRA's. Pan's clear time was within 15% of her own, and his deadly assault score was only about 5% lower. For a non-S rank limited, this is pretty respectable, especially since it allows you to use ASTRA on other teams. But as a side note, if you were trying to replace any of the supports listed with more free-to-play options like Nicole or Lucy, the performance of said teams did end up dropping by around 13%, which is not game-breaking but does feel worse, especially considering that their gameplay also drops in quality and comfort. Now let's talk about ASTRA teams in general. Another question I personally set out to answer was which DPS paired best with Jufufu and ASTRA, as again, both are incredibly powerful when paired together. Now that's when I personally arrived at XUAN, Jufufu, and ASTRA. Now of course, I already talked about this team in the XUAN section, so I won't go too much further than this, aside from the fact that it's strong, but because this was a duplicate result that I found, I also decided to test all other DPS available, and that's when I found Ellen and Evelyn to be the next fastest DPS when paired with Jufufu and ASTRA. When paired with Ellen, the clear time was 29% slower than the fastest team, and by contrast with Evelyn, the clear time was 25% slower instead. However, with these teams against the average, they were still roughly 10 to 14% faster, which is extremely respectable, especially considering that Ellen and Evelyn are definitely not the same as XUAN or Miyabi. Now, I was also curious about free-to-play options with this setup if you were someone who is committed to the support-only future-proofing playstyle, and as a result, if you wanted a more free-to-play option, taking someone like Harumasa was still fine, assuming you accepted the decrease in clear speed. For transparency's sake, Harumasa-based teams were still clearing in general, but these were leading to anywhere between 30 to 37% decreases in terms of clear speed compared to the other DPSs in his category. Now, overall, however, there were other teams that I felt important to mention that were worked with Jufufu as a whole, and said teams were the following: Evelyn Lighter Jufufu, Hugo Lighter Jufufu, Silver Ambi Jufufu Trigger, and Ellen Jufufu Lucy. Now, though all these teams had anywhere between 17 to even 28% differences in clear speeds, they were all quite competitive to each other, assuming you use them in their advantageous Deadly Assault or Shiyu defense catered stages. On the topic of Deadly Assault, I did have comparisons I wanted to discuss regarding scores. The highest performing team of XUAN Jufufu ASTRA was amazing, don't get me wrong, but the Pan team, as earlier mentioned, was only 2% worse in scoring, making it a very comparable team if ASTRA isn't available or if you want to use her for another team. Now, additionally, the top 5 teams as a whole were all within 15% score-wise compared to the best performing XUAN Jufufu ASTRA team, which is good news for those looking to use Jufufu outside of just with XUAN. However, with all this, I would still definitely recommend using XUAN with Jufufu, assuming both are available to use, and otherwise using Jufufu as a stunner is fine, but agents with specific pairings like Hugo Lighter or Ambi Trigger will definitely want their limited agent pairing alongside Jufufu if they want to see the best results, and otherwise, if said agents aren't available, you could definitely expect anywhere between a 15 and 20% decrease in DPS. Now let's talk about the pre-farm and the resources that you'll need for Jufufu. For Denise, you'll need 3,705,000, and in terms of agent EXP, you'll need 300 senior investigation logs. After this, you'll need 250 specialized burn chips, 75 advanced burn chips, and 25 basic burn chips in order to level up her skills. But after this, for ascending your agents, you'll need 30 buster stun seals, 32 advanced stun seals, 4 basic stun seals, 5 hamster cage passes, and in terms of her notorious hunt and expert challenge, she'll need 9 exuvia of refinement and 60 miasmic elytron. Now for W engines, Jufufu's signature W engine Roaring Furnace is her best in slot, offering the strongest synergy with her kit by enhancing both her daze and attack stats. Her options are more limited given her unique playstyle, but that said, if you simply just use other options that have attack percent or that provide impact individually, the performance of most teams with Jufufu will only decrease or differ by 10 to 15% at most. Fossilized Core can also be used as a free-to-play option, but bear in mind that this engine does not have attack percent as a main set if that's something that you're considering. For non-free-to-play options, let's now talk about Blazing Laurel. This W engine remains one of the most usable and decent performing options on most stun agents, and that's because of the added crit damage and daze that it provides. To be clear though, this is an engine that synergizes specifically with ice and fire agents, so if you're planning on using Jufufu without either of these attributes, keep this in mind. The last option that I wanted to briefly touch on is Hellfire Gears, and that's because this engine is essentially the S rank version of Fossilized Core, but it provides a bit more attack since it's an S rank compared to being an A rank. Now with all this, I would definitely recommend Fossilized Core and simply accepting the loss of attack, but otherwise Hellfire Gears or her signature will do fine as well as Jufufu's W engine. One of the newest disk drives, King of the Summit, was clearly tailor-made for Jufufu, making it her new best in slot 4-piece set thanks to its strong synergy with their stun and buff based kit. However, if farming for a new set isn't your thing, other buffing sets like Protopunk, Swing Jazz, Astro Voice, or even Shockstar Disco can work temporarily, but admittedly these are much worse options than King of the Summit. Now moving past 4-piece options, when it comes to 2-piece, there is much more flexibility. Options like Swing Jazz, Woodpecker Electro, Shockstar Disco, Hormone Punk, and Astro Voice all offer useful stats that can help when reaching certain thresholds or in terms of actually affecting her gameplay with additions like energy regeneration. But now, as a quick reminder, Jufufu has 2 really important breakpoints that she cares about. The first is the 3,400 attack to max out the buff from Tiger's Roar, but as we discussed earlier, getting close to this amount and accepting that you'll be shy of this number is completely fine, especially if it prevents you from ruining your build or spend way too much time farming for perfect substats. The other breakpoint you need to hit is 50 crit rate, as this is the condition for King of the Summit's disk drive passive, and this one, unlike the attack threshold from her core passive, is a non-negotiable and has no flexibility. You really do need at least 50 crit rate for this to activate. But now it's that time of the video once again, should you pull for Jufufu? Now Jufufu's goofy yet lovable visuals and really fun gameplay do make her a personal favorite of mine already, and the best part is she's not just fun or cool looking to play, she's genuinely strong and brings great value to her preferred teams. With this, I do have a few pros and cons for her, but ultimately this is just a guideline for what I found when experimenting with her. Now in terms of pros, she provides a crit damage buff to the team while also taking the stunning slot, and with this, again, she is one of the few stunners in the game who actually provides crit damage specifically from their kit. Now additionally, with their crit damage buff, she synergizes perfectly with XUAN, who otherwise doesn't really receive the same level of buffs from other characters like Lighter or even attack buffers in general. But next, admittedly, her design is very nice and her gameplay is very fun to see from even off screen. great. Finally, Jufufu doesn't also take up much field time on the topic of screen time in general, and if you're just someone that wants to play with the main DPS who stays on field entirely, well, this is another good investment too. Now, she does have cons, and the first that I have is the fact that, well, she's the second fire limited in the game, with Lighter already being a very usable and powerful fire enhancing stunner. And finally, in terms of her pairing with XUAN, it is great that she buffs XUAN so well, but when Jufufu ends up getting paired with other characters compared to someone like Lighter, she does feel a bit weaker, as there are characters that would rather have the stun duration increase or the fire damage increase from Lighter, and of course he is her competition, as she is the other of the two limited fire stunner agents. Now overall, if you don't have ASTRA but still want to run XUAN, I definitely recommend picking up Jufufu. She provides good days to the team while also providing a helpful damage buff, and these two aspects alone already make her much better than most dazers currently released. In addition to this, her ability to be usable even when her additional ability isn't always active makes her a fantastic fit for most teams. Now as a result of this, and just personally, I'll be pulling for her, and not just for the buffs that she brings, but also because she's so goofy looking on field. However, as always guys, take some time to do your own research and see if she's the right fit for your team, but of course feel free to do as you like. That's all I've got for Jufufu though. Anyways though guys, that's going to be it for today. Thanks again for watching. If you enjoyed, again, make sure to check out the rest of my socials and my content, but I'll see you all in the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy, good luck with Jufufu.